Jake Morrison wiped the sweat from his forehead as he floated through the twisted wreckage of the abandoned space station. The metal corridors were dark and cold, lit only by the harsh beam of his helmet light. Dead bodies of various alien species drifted past him in the zero gravity, their faces frozen in expressions of terror and pain. Something terrible had happened here, but Jake didn't care about the details. He was here for salvage, not answers. His ship, the Stardancer, was docked to what remained of the station's cargo bay. Jake had been working alone for 3 hours, cutting through debris with his plasma torch and loading anything valuable into storage containers. The silence was broken only by his steady breathing and the occasional crackle of his radio. "Computer, scan this section for valuable materials," Jake said into his comm unit. The ship's AI responded in a calm female voice, detecting traces of rare earth metals in the wall panels. Also reading several intact data storage units in the next compartment. Jake pushed himself toward the indicated area, his magnetic boots clicking against the metal floor when he activated them. The next room had been some kind of laboratory. Broken equipment floated everywhere, and Jake had to push aside chunks of twisted metal to reach the storage units. The first data core was about the size of a briefcase, its surface covered in alien writing that Jake couldn't read. The second was smaller, but seemed to be made of a more advanced material. Both devices appeared to be intact despite the destruction around them. Well, Jake muttered to himself. Someone might pay good money for these. Jake had been a military engineer for the Earth Defense Force before he started his salvage business. He knew enough about alien technology to recognize valuable equipment when he saw it. Data cores like these often contain technical specifications, historical records, or scientific research that various groups would pay handsomely to acquire. As Jake loaded the cores into his storage container, he noticed something odd. The laboratory equipment around him wasn't designed for normal scientific research. The tables had restraints built into them, and there were what looked like surgical instruments scattered among the debris. Dark stains covered many of the surfaces, and Jake realized with growing unease that this might have been some kind of medical facility. Jake finished his salvage work and returned to his ship. The Stardancer was a modified cargo vessel, not large, but reliable. Jake had spent years upgrading its systems, adding better shields, more powerful engines, and hidden weapon compartments. In his line of work, you never knew when you might need to defend yourself. Once back aboard his ship, Jake secured the salvaged items and began the journey to Port Nexus, a trading station on the edge of civilized space. Port Nexus was the kind of place where no one asked too many questions about where you got your goods. As long as you had something to sell. The journey took 2 days. During that time, Jake tried to access the data cores using his ship's computer systems. The first core was completely encrypted, but he managed to crack the basic security on the second one. What he found made his blood run cold. The files contained detailed records of biological experiments conducted on living beings. The subjects were members of dozens of different species, all labeled with numbers instead of names. The experiments involved testing various toxins, diseases, and genetic modifications. Jake saw images of creatures writhing in pain, their bodies twisted by horrible mutations, but the worst part was the symbol at the top of every document. It was the mark of the Galactic Vorthek Empire, the most powerful military force in known space. The Empire claimed to be a civilized government that protected its citizens and maintained order across hundreds of star systems. These files showed the truth was very different. Jake realized he was holding evidence of war crimes on a massive scale. The Empire had been conducting illegal biological weapons research, using captured prisoners as test subjects. This information would be worth a fortune to the right buyers, but it would also make Jake a target. The Galactic Liberation Front was an underground organization that fought against the Empire's oppression. They had been trying to expose the Empire's crimes for years, but they lacked concrete evidence. These data cores could be exactly what they needed to turn public opinion against the Empire. Jake made his decision. When he reached Port Nexus, he would contact the Liberation Front and sell them the information. The money would be good, but more importantly, He would be doing something to help the countless beings suffering under the Empire's rule. Port Nexus was a massive space station built inside a hollowed-out asteroid. Ships of all sizes and designs docked at its many ports, bringing traders, smugglers, and pirates from across the galaxy. The station's corridors were crowded with beings of dozens of different species, all conducting business in the shadows. Jake rented a small room in the station's residential sector and began trying to contact the Liberation Front. It took him several hours of asking the right questions to the right people, but eventually he was put in touch with a representative. The meeting was arranged for the next day in a private booth at one of the station's many bars. Jake arrived early, choosing a table where he could watch the entrance. He had brought one of the data cores with him as a sample, keeping the other safely hidden aboard his ship, the Liberation Front representative turned out to be a young woman named Lisa Carter. She was human like Jake, which surprised him. Most humans preferred to stay in Earth's solar system rather than venture into the dangerous wider galaxy. "Mr. Morrison," Lisa said as she sat down across from him, "I understand you have information that might interest us." Jake slid the data core across the table. "This contains evidence of biological weapons testing conducted by the Empire. There are records of experiments on living subjects, development of illegal toxins, and systematic genocide of entire species." Lisa's eyes widened as she examined the device. "If this is genuine, it could change everything. The Empire has been claiming they're a force for peace and stability, but this proves they're nothing but murderers." "I have more data where this came from," Jake said, "but I'm not giving it away for free. The Liberation Front can afford to pay for information this valuable," Lisa nodded. "We can discuss payment once our experts verify the authenticity of these files. I'll need to take this back to our leadership for analysis." Jake agreed to the arrangement, and Lisa left with the data core. He returned to his ship feeling satisfied with the deal. The Liberation Front would pay well for the information, and he would finally be doing something meaningful with his life. Instead of just scraping by as a salvage operator, what Jake didn't know was that the Empire's intelligence network had been monitoring Liberation Front communications for months. Within hours of Lisa's departure, encrypted messages were being transmitted across the galaxy. Reporting the discovery of the stolen data cores, Emperor Vorthak himself was informed of the security breach the ancient alien ruler had maintained his power for centuries through careful control of information and the systematic elimination of threats. He would not allow a single human traitor to expose his empire's darkest secrets. The order went out immediately. 12 of the Empire's most elite assassins would be dispatched to eliminate Jake Morrison and recover the stolen data. These Shadow Blade operatives had never failed a mission in over 200 years of service. Jake Morrison had no idea that his life was about to change forever. Jake Morrison was working on his ship's engine when the message came through. The communication was routed through 17 different relay stations to hide its origin, but the voice on the other end sounded genuinely concerned. "Mr. Morrison, you don't know me, but I know what you found on that station. The Empire has sent killers after you. 12 of their best assassins are coming to Port Nexus. You have maybe 6 hours before they arrive." The transmission cut off before Jake could respond. He stared at the comm unit for a long moment, his mind racing. The voice had been human, but that didn't mean much. Anyone could have sent the message, and it might be some kind of trick, but Jake hadn't survived this long in the salvage business by ignoring warnings. He had made enough enemies over the years to know that threats should be taken seriously. If the Empire really had sent assassins after him, he needed to be ready. Jake had spent 5 years in the Earth Defense Force before becoming a traitor. His specialty had been combat engineering, which meant he knew how to build weapons and traps, as well as how to use them. More importantly, he had studied alien combat techniques during his military service. The Empire's forces were dangerous, but they weren't invincible. The first thing Jake did was seal his ship's airlocks and activate the security systems. The Stardancer had been modified with hidden weapon ports, reinforced hull plating, and a sophisticated sensor array. If someone wanted to board his ship, They would have to fight for it. Next, Jake began setting up defensive measures throughout the ship. He placed explosive charges at key points in the corridors, rigged the lighting system to create blinding flashes on command, and set up motion sensors that would alert him to any intruders. The ship's cargo bay was turned into a kill zone with automated weapons hidden behind false panels. Jake also prepared several surprises based on what he knew about common alien physiology. Many species had different atmospheric requirements than humans, and some were vulnerable to specific frequencies of light or sound. He modified the ship's environmental systems to exploit these weaknesses if necessary. By the time Jake finished his preparations, 5 hours had passed. He settled into the ship's command center with a cup of coffee and waited. The sensors showed normal traffic around Port Nexus, but Jake knew that assassins wouldn't announce their arrival. The first attack came at exactly the 6-hour mark. Jake's sensors detected a brief energy signature near the ship's hull, followed by nothing. Someone had just used some kind of phase technology to pass through the ship's outer wall. Jake activated his prepared countermeasures immediately. Electromagnetic pulse generators hidden throughout the ship discharged simultaneously, creating a wave of energy that would disrupt most alien technology. The ship's lights flickered as the pulse spread through every corridor and compartment. In the cargo bay, a figure suddenly became visible. The creature was tall and thin, with gray skin and large black eyes. It had been moving through the ship invisibly until the electromagnetic pulse disrupted its cloaking device. The alien looked around in confusion, apparently unable to understand what had happened. Jake was watching through the ship's security cameras. He recognized the species from his military training. This was an umbral, a race known for their ability to phase in and out of normal space. They were skilled infiltrators and assassins, but their abilities depended on advanced technology implanted in their bodies. "Welcome aboard," Jake said over the ship's intercom. "I hope you're enjoying your stay." The umbral spun around, trying to locate the source of the voice. Jake triggered one of his prepared traps, causing a section of the cargo bay floor to collapse. The alien fell into the space below, landing hard on the metal decking. Jake moved quickly through the ship's corridors, carrying a modified mining laser. The weapon was designed to cut through asteroid rock, but it would work just as well on alien flesh. He found the umbral trying to climb out of the hole, its movement sluggish and uncoordinated. "You made a mistake coming here," Jake said as he aimed the laser. The umbral tried to activate its phase technology, but the electromagnetic pulse had damaged its implants. It could only watch as Jake pulled the trigger. The mining laser burned through the alien's chest, killing it instantly. Jake dragged the body to the airlock and spaced it. 1 down, 11 to go. The second attack began 20 minutes later. This time, Jake felt a strange pressure in his head, like someone was trying to push their way into his thoughts. He recognized the sensation from his military training. This was a telepathic assault. Jake smiled grimly. The Empire's assassins had done their research on human biology, but they hadn't learned about recent technological developments. Jake's skull contained cybernetic implants that protected his brain from psychic intrusion. The implants had been expensive, but they were worth every credit in situations like this. The telepathic pressure increased, becoming painful. Jake's attacker was trying to force their way past his mental defenses. But instead of resisting, Jake did something unexpected. He opened his mind completely, allowing the alien to make contact. The result was immediate and devastating. The cybernetic implants sent a massive feedback pulse through the psychic link, scrambling the attacker's nervous system. Jake heard a scream of pain from somewhere outside the ship, followed by the sound of a body hitting the docking bay floor. Jake checked his external cameras and saw a female alien writhing in agony next to his ship. She was a Mindripper, a species that used telepathy as their primary weapon. The feedback from Jake's implants had left her brain damaged beyond repair. Jake ended her suffering with an explosive charge placed near the docking bay. The blast was small but precise, eliminating the threat without damaging the station around his ship. The third assassin was more careful. Jake's sensors detected movement in the docking bay, but he couldn't identify the source. Someone was approaching his ship, but they were using some kind of advanced camouflage to avoid detection. Jake activated his thermal imaging system and began scanning the area around his ship. Most alien species had different body temperatures than humans, which made them visible to infrared sensors even when they were using optical camouflage. There, a heat signature moving along the docking bay wall. The figure was roughly humanoid, but moved with an odd, flowing motion that suggested it might be a shapeshifter. Jake had encountered similar beings during his military service. This assassin was trying to mimic the appearance of a station worker. Jake watched through his cameras as the figure approached his ship's main airlock, carrying what appeared to be a routine maintenance scanner. The disguise was perfect, but Jake noticed something the shapeshifter had missed: the real maintenance. Workers on Port Nexus always worked in pairs for safety reasons. This one was alone. Jake waited until the imposter was standing directly in front of his ship's airlock. Then he triggered a trap he had prepared specifically for this situation. The airlock opened suddenly, creating a powerful suction that pulled the shapeshifter inside. Before the alien could react, Jake sealed the inner door and began depressurizing the airlock. The shapeshifter realized what was happening and tried to change its form, but it was too late. Jake opened the outer door, spacing the assassin into the vacuum of space. Jake returned to his command center and poured himself another cup of coffee. 3 assassins were dead, and he was still alive. The Empire's killers were skilled and dangerous, but they had made a crucial mistake. They had underestimated human ingenuity and determination. More importantly, they had assumed that humans were weak and primitive. Jake had spent his military career studying alien combat techniques and weaknesses. He knew how to fight beings that were stronger, faster, and more technologically advanced than humans. The key was to never fight fair. Humans had survived on Earth by being cleverer than their predators, not stronger. Jake intended to use every advantage he could find. As news of the failed assassination attempts spread through Port Nexus, Jake began to realize that his situation had changed. He was no longer just a salvage operator trying to sell stolen data. He had become something the Empire feared, a human who refused to be intimidated. Jake checked his weapons and prepared for the next wave of attackers. The Empire had sent 12 assassins to kill him, but Jake was going to send them all back home in pieces. Zixthara stood in the command center of her stealth ship, watching the security footage from Port Nexus with growing rage. 3 of her best assassins were dead, killed by a single human traitor who should have been an easy target. The 4-armed reptilian warrior had served the Empire for over 50 years, and she had never seen anything like this. "Commander, the human is more dangerous than our intelligence report suggested," said one of her remaining operatives, an insectoid creature named Kloxvex. "Perhaps we should request additional support." Zixthara's 4 hands clenched into fists. "We are Shadowblade assassins. We do not require support to eliminate one primitive human. The others failed because they underestimated their target. I will not make the same mistake." The commander activated her ship's communication system and contacted the remaining 9 assassins. Each operative was aboard their own specialized vessel, equipped with weapons and tools designed for their particular skills. They had been hunting targets across the galaxy for decades, and no prey had ever escaped them. "Change of tactics," Zixthara announced. "We attack in coordinated pairs. The human has prepared defenses aboard his ship, so we will force him to divide his attention between multiple threats." The first pair consisted of 2 poison specialists from the methane-rich world of Toxoprime. Kylemoth and Pillmoth were twins who breathed poisonous gas instead of oxygen. They could produce dozens of different toxins from specialized organs in their bodies, and their preferred method of killing was to flood enclosed spaces with deadly vapors. The twin assassins approached Jake's ship from opposite sides, moving through the maintenance tunnels that ran beneath Port Nexus. They planned to breach the ship's hull simultaneously and fill the interior with a cocktail of nerve agents that would kill any human. Within minutes, Jake was monitoring the station's sensor network when he detected the unusual atmospheric readings. Someone was moving through the maintenance tunnels. and they were leaving traces of methane and other gases behind them. Jake had encountered similar beings during his military service, and he knew exactly what they were planning. The human had spent the last 2 hours modifying his ship's life support systems. Instead of just filtering the air, the system could now analyze incoming gases and produce counteragents to neutralize them. Jake had also installed emergency oxygen supplies throughout the ship, giving him the ability to survive in a contaminated environment. When the twin assassins breached his ship's hull, Jake was ready for them. The moment his sensors detected the incoming poison gas, he activated his countermeasures. The life support system began pumping pure oxygen into the ship's corridors, creating a dangerous mixture with the methane being produced by the attackers. Jake waited until the gas concentrations reached the right levels, then triggered a small electrical spark in the ship's main corridor. The result was a spectacular explosion that turned the twin assassins into balls of fire. Their methane-based biology made them extremely vulnerable to oxygen-rich environments, and the explosion consumed them completely. The blast damaged several sections of Jake's ship, but the human had anticipated this. He had moved all essential systems to protected areas and sealed off the sections that would be most vulnerable to attack. The Stardancer would need repairs, but it was still functional. While Jake was dealing with the poison attack, 2 more assassins were approaching from a different angle. Drokter was a heavily armored warrior from a high-gravity world, with a shell-like carapace that could deflect most weapons. His partner, Scarix, was a blade-armed mantis creature with reflexes fast enough to deflect laser fire. The 2 combat specialists planned to launch a frontal assault on Jake's ship, overwhelming his defenses through sheer firepower and superior combat skills. They had studied the humans' previous encounters and believed they could succeed where stealth had failed. Jake watched the 2 aliens approach through his external cameras. They were moving with the confidence of beings who had never been defeated in combat. Drokter's armor gleamed under the station's lights, while Scarix's blade arms moved in a hypnotic pattern as he prepared for battle. The human had prepared for this type of attack as well. Instead of trying to fight the aliens directly, Jake had turned the docking bay into a trap. He had spent hours repositioning the industrial equipment used for ship repairs, creating a maze of heavy machinery that could be activated remotely. When the 2 assassins reached Jake's ship, they found the main airlock sealed and reinforced. Drokter began cutting through the barrier with a plasma cutter while Scarix stood guard. They were so focused on their task that they didn't notice the welding equipment moving above them. Jake triggered his trap when both aliens were in position. Industrial welding arms descended from the ceiling, spraying jets of molten metal at temperatures hot enough to melt starship hull plating. The assassins tried to dodge, but the confined space of the docking bay limited their movement. Drokter's armor provided no protection against the sustained heat of the welding torches. The metal began to melt and fuse, trapping the warrior inside his own shell. He screamed as the molten metal flowed through the gaps in his armor, cooking him alive. Scarix tried to cut through the welding arms with his blade limbs, but the industrial equipment was too heavily armored. Jake activated more machinery, including a massive hydraulic press used for shaping metal components. The press descended slowly but inexorably, crushing the mantis assassin despite his desperate attempts to escape. Jake surveyed the wreckage of his docking bay through his security cameras. 4 more assassins were dead and his ship was still intact. But he knew the worst was yet to come. The remaining assassins would be even more dangerous and their leader would be looking for revenge. The human began preparing for the next wave of attacks. He had used most of his prepared traps, but there were still options available. Jake had learned during his military service that the key to surviving against superior opponents was to keep them guessing. Every attack had to be met with an unexpected response. Jake also knew that his actions were being watched throughout Port Nexus. The criminal underworld thrived on information, and word of his success against the Empire's assassins was spreading quickly. Some of the station's residents were beginning to see him as a hero, while others were placing bets on how long he would survive. The human didn't care about his reputation. He was focused on staying alive and making sure the Empire's killers never threatened anyone else. Jake had discovered evidence of the Empire's crimes, and he intended to make sure that information reached the people who could use it. But first, he had to survive long enough to complete his mission. 7 assassins remained, including their leader. Jake checked his weapons and began planning his next move. The Empire had sent their best killers to eliminate him, but Jake Morrison was going to send them all back home in pieces. The station's communication system crackled to life, carrying a message from the remaining assassins. Zixthara's voice was filled with rage and frustration as she spoke. "Human, you have killed my operatives and dishonored the Shadowblade organization. I am offering you one chance to surrender. Give us the data you stole, and your death will be quick and painless." Jake activated his own communication system and responded, "I've got a better idea. Why don't you and your friends come and take it from me? I'm not going anywhere." The transmission ended, and Jake prepared for the final battle. The Empire's assassins had made a mistake by underestimating human determination and ingenuity. Now they were going to pay the price for their arrogance. Zixthara paced the bridge of her stealth ship, her forearms moving in agitated patterns as she tried to understand how a single human had killed 7 of her best assassins. The Shadowblade organization had never suffered losses like this, and the reptilian commander knew her reputation would be destroyed if she failed to complete this mission. "Commander, perhaps we should withdraw and request additional support," suggested her communications officer, a 6-eyed creature named Vexstar. "The human has proven more dangerous than anticipated." Zixthara spun around, her yellow eyes blazing with fury. "We are the Empire's elite killers. We do not retreat from primitives. If stealth and coordination have failed, then we will use overwhelming force." The commander activated the ship's weapon systems and targeted Port Nexus itself. The trading station was technically neutral territory, but Zixthara no longer cared about diplomatic consequences. She would destroy the entire station if necessary to eliminate Jake Morrison. "Attention Port Nexus Control," Zixthara broadcast. "On all frequencies. You are harboring a criminal wanted by the Galactic Vorthek Empire. Surrender the human Jake Morrison immediately, or we will consider this station a legitimate military target." The response came from Port Nexus Administrator Carlos Rodriguez, a grizzled former smuggler who had been running the station for 20 years. "This is neutral territory, Empire ship. You have no authority here, and we don't negotiate with terrorists." Zixthara snarled and ordered her weapons officer to target the station's main power generator. "Fire a warning shot. Show them we are serious." The energy beam lanced out from the stealth ship, striking one of the station's external sensor arrays. The explosion sent debris spinning into space and caused warning lights to flash throughout Port Nexus. The message was clear: surrender. Jake Morrison or face destruction, but Zixthara had made a critical error. Port Nexus was home to thousands of criminals, smugglers, and pirates from across the galaxy. These beings had no love for the Empire, and they didn't appreciate being threatened on their own territory. Jake was monitoring the situation from his damaged ship when his communication system activated. The caller was Lisa Carter, the Liberation Front representative who had bought his stolen data. "Jake, the whole station is talking about what you've done," Lisa said. "You've killed 7 Empire assassins single-handedly. People are starting to see you as a symbol of resistance." Jake shook his head. "I'm not a symbol. I'm just trying to stay alive." "Maybe, but you've given people hope. The Empire has terrorized this galaxy for centuries, and you've proven they can be beaten. We want to help you finish this." Before Jake could respond, his sensors detected movement throughout the station. Ships were undocking from various ports, and armed figures were moving through the corridors. The criminal underworld was mobilizing, and they were preparing to fight. The first ship to engage, Zixthara's vessel, was a heavily modified freighter captained by a Regilian pirate named Crackster. The alien had lost his homeworld to an Empire invasion 20 years earlier, and he had been waiting for a chance at revenge. "This is for Rigel 7, Empire scum," Crackster transmitted as he opened fire. The battle was brief but intense. Zixthara's stealth ship was more advanced, but the pirate fought with the desperation of someone who had nothing left to lose. Both ships sustained heavy damage before Crackster's vessel exploded, taking the pirate and his crew with it, but the fight had attracted attention. More ships were approaching, and they were all hostile to the Empire. Zixthara realized she was facing a full-scale uprising, and her mission was becoming impossible to complete. "All remaining operatives, converge on the human's position," she ordered. "We end this now, before the situation gets worse." The 5 remaining assassins moved through Port Nexus toward Jake's damaged ship. They had abandoned stealth in favor of speed, knowing that time was running out. The station's security forces and criminal gangs were mobilizing, and soon the area would be too dangerous for the assassins to operate. Jake watched the approaching killers through his security cameras and made a decision that would change everything. Instead of waiting for them to reach his ship, he would take the fight to them. The station's industrial complex would provide better terrain for the kind of battle he was planning. The human gathered his weapons and left his ship for the first time since the attacks began. He moved through the station's corridors with purpose, heading for the central processing plant where raw materials were refined for starship construction. The facility was a maze of pipes, machinery, and chemical tanks that would give him the advantage he needed. Jake reached the processing plant just as the first assassin arrived. Frostbane was a crystalline being from an ice world, capable of freezing anything it touched. The alien moved through the facility like a living glacier, turning metal pipes into brittle ice and creating treacherous footing wherever it went. But Jake had studied the facility's layout and knew exactly how to exploit its systems. He activated the emergency heating protocol, flooding the area with superheated steam from the facility's fusion reactors. The sudden temperature change shattered Frostbane's crystalline body, reducing the assassin to glittering fragments. The second assassin to arrive was Voltsurge, a being made of pure electrical energy. The creature could possess electronic systems and use them as weapons, making it extremely dangerous in a facility full of automated machinery. Jake had prepared for this threat by installing manual overrides on all the critical systems. When Voltsurge tried to possess the facility's main computer, Jake physically disconnected the power supply. The electrical being found itself trapped in a dead system, unable to escape or find a new host. Jake then activated a massive electromagnetic pulse generator that he had rigged to the facility's main power grid. The pulse dispersed Voltsurge's energy form, scattering the assassin's consciousness across the station's electrical systems until it ceased to exist. The third assassin was Meltjaw, a creature that could spit highly corrosive acid. The alien tried to dissolve its way through the facility's protective barriers, but Jake had prepared for this as well. He lured the assassin into a chamber filled with industrial base compounds used in the refining process. When Meltjaw spat acid at Jake, the human dodged, and the acid struck the base compounds instead. The resulting neutralization reaction created a violent chemical explosion that consumed the assassin completely. 2 assassins remained, and Jake knew they would be the most dangerous. He could hear them moving through the facility, searching for him with the patience of experienced hunters. The final battle was about to begin. Jake checked his weapons and moved deeper into the processing plant. The facility's zero-gravity manufacturing bay would be the perfect place for the confrontation he was planning. In weightless conditions, his human adaptability would give him an advantage over aliens who were built for specific environments. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the facility as Zixthara and her final operative closed in on their target. Jake Morrison had killed 10 of the Empire's elite assassins, but the reptilian commander was confident that her superior training and equipment would be enough to finish him. She had no idea that the human was already 3 steps ahead of her, waiting in the perfect killing ground he had chosen for their final battle. The zero-gravity manufacturing bay was a massive spherical chamber filled with floating machinery and construction equipment. Jake Morrison pushed himself through the weightless environment, using handholds and support beams to navigate toward the center of the chamber. His magnetic boots were switched off, allowing him to move freely in 3 dimensions. Behind him, Jake could hear the heavy footsteps of his final pursuer. Zixthara had entered the chamber with her remaining operative, a slug-like creature called Slime Rex that could reshape its body to fit through any opening. The 2 assassins were moving carefully, knowing that this would be their last chance to complete their mission. Jake reached the center of the chamber and positioned himself near a large piece of construction equipment. The machine was designed to assemble starship components in zero gravity with multiple robotic arms and cutting tools. Jake had spent the last hour studying the facility's schematics, and he knew exactly how to use the equipment to his advantage. "Human," Zixthara called out as she floated into view, "you have caused enough damage. Surrender now, and I will make your death swift." Jake could see the reptilian commander clearly for the first time. She was larger than he had expected, with 4 powerful arms ending in clawed hands. Her scales were a deep green color, and her yellow eyes showed intelligence and fury in equal measure. She carried advanced weapons that glowed with energy, and her movements showed the confidence of someone who had never been defeated. "I don't think so," Jake replied, keeping his voice steady. "You came here to kill me, and I'm going to make sure you don't leave alive." Zixthara snarled and launched herself toward Jake with surprising speed. Her 4 arms moved independently, striking at different angles while her powerful legs provided thrust in the weightless environment. Jake barely managed to dodge the first attack, using a construction beam to change his direction. The battle that followed was unlike anything Jake had ever experienced. Zixthara was a master of zero-gravity combat, using her multiple limbs to control her movement and attack simultaneously. She could grab onto surfaces with 2 arms while striking with the other 2, giving her incredible versatility, but Jake had advantages of his own. His human flexibility and adaptability allowed him to use the environment in ways that the reptilian commander couldn't match. He swung from beam to beam like an acrobat, using his momentum to deliver powerful strikes while avoiding Zixthara's claws. The fight moved throughout the chamber as both combatants used every piece of equipment as weapons or shields. Jake activated the construction machinery, causing robotic arms to sweep through the air and cutting tools to spark to life. Zixthara dodged the mechanical attacks while trying to corner her human opponent. During one exchange, Jake managed to grab one of Zixthara's weapons. The energy blade was designed for her 4-fingered hands, but Jake adapted quickly to its weight and balance. He used the weapon to sever cables and support beams, creating obstacles and hazards throughout the chamber. Zixthara was becoming frustrated. The human was proving more skilled than she had expected, and the zero-gravity environment was limiting her natural advantages. She decided to end the fight with a desperate gambit, activating an explosive device attached to her armor. "If I cannot kill you, human, then we will die together," she hissed. Jake saw the blinking light on the device and realized what was happening. He had perhaps 30 seconds before the explosion would destroy the entire chamber. Instead of trying to escape, Jake did something that caught Zixthara completely off guard. He moved closer to her, using his superior knowledge of physics and momentum. Jake grabbed onto the reptilian commander and used her own body weight to spin them both toward the chamber's outer wall. At the last second, he activated the emergency airlock that led to the facility's waste disposal system. The airlock opened just as the explosive detonated. The blast propelled both fighters through the opening, but Jake had positioned himself so that Zixthara absorbed most of the explosion's force. The reptilian commander died instantly, her body torn apart by the blast. Jake tumbled through the waste disposal system, battered and bleeding, but still alive. He activated his emergency beacon and waited for rescue teams to find him. The battle was over, and he had 1 hours later. Jake stood in the Port Nexus medical bay, his injuries treated and his strength slowly returning. Around him, the station's residents were celebrating the defeat of the Empire's assassins. Word of his victory was spreading throughout the galaxy, inspiring hope in beings who had lived in fear for generations. Lisa Carter arrived with a cargo container and a grim smile. "Your package is ready for shipping," she said. "All 12 assassins, just as you promised." Jake looked at the container that held the remains of his enemies. The Empire had sent their best killers to eliminate him, but they had underestimated human determination and ingenuity. Now their failure would send a message to every corner of the galaxy. Jake activated his communication system and began recording a message to Emperor Vorthak. The transmission would be included with the cargo container, ensuring that the Empire's leader understood exactly what had happened. Your assassins failed because you sent them to kill a human without understanding what that means, Jake said. Into the recorder. We don't just survive, we adapt, we overcome, and we never forget. The data you wanted to suppress is now being transmitted to every corner of the galaxy. Your Empire's crimes will be exposed. Jake paused, thinking about all the beings who had suffered under the Empire's rule. The experiments, the genocide, the systematic oppression of entire species. It was time for that to end. Send more assassins if you want, Jake continued. But know that every human you threaten will be ready for you. We've learned what you really are, and we're not going to let you continue, the message ended, and Jake sealed the container. Within hours, it would be shipped to the Empire's capital world, carrying both the bodies of the failed assassins and the promise of human resistance. Jake returned to his ship and began preparing for departure. The Stardancer was damaged but still functional, and he had work to do. The Liberation Front had offered him a permanent position, and there were other humans throughout the galaxy who needed to hear his message. As Jake's ship left Port Nexus, he could see other vessels preparing to follow. The criminal underworld had been inspired by his victory, and they were ready to take the fight to the Empire. But more importantly, human ships were emerging from hiding throughout the galaxy. For too long, humanity had tried to avoid conflict with the Empire. They had stayed in their own systems, keeping their heads down and hoping to be left alone. But Jake Morrison had shown them that the Empire could be defeated, and humans were no longer willing to hide. The final scene showed Emperor Vorthak in his throne room, surrounded by his terrified advisors. The ancient ruler was holding Jake's message device, his face twisted with rage and fear. Around him, reports were flooding and of human resistance cells activating across the galaxy. The Empire had ruled through fear and superior technology, but they had made a fatal mistake. They had underestimated the species that had climbed from the caves of Earth to the stars themselves. Humanity was done hiding, and the galaxy would never be the same. Jake Morrison had kept his promise. He had sent the Empire's assassins back in pieces, and with them he had sent a warning that would echo throughout the stars. The hunter had become the hunted, and humanity's greatest enemy was about to discover what it meant to face a species that refused to surrender.